what I'm really going to talk about, I'm going to talk about compilers and video games and stuff, but I'm really going to talk about how new technologies are developed. And fundamentally, that is what we're all about. We develop new technologies and we want people to use them. Right? Do we really want to develop technologies and they don't get used? It can be a bit frustrating. We want people to use them. In order to be people to use them, those technologies have to go into sustainable businesses. And over the years, a lot of new technologies have been developed and adopted. And so you can actually study it. You can actually study what it looks like to adopt new technologies and bring them into the market. And there's lots of aspects of it that are highly unexpected. And so if you are a technologist inventing new things, you will discover that the unexpected is quite important for the development of your technology and the adoption. And some of you may be thinking, oh, I want to start a company. You might want to start a compiler company. My biggest advice is never start a compiler company. It's a really, really bad idea. So you're wondering, why am I standing here? Why am I seen as a success with it? We didn't sell our company as a compiler company. So I'm going to talk to you about what actually happened and how you create value, business value out of compilers. But at the same time, you know, the truth is, if you work in industry, as most of you probably will, we're all capitalists. In the technology industry, we're all capitalists. Most people are actually paid out of normal, accountants would call it OPEX, right? Operation expenses, right? Like you constantly buy stuff. Like if you're a farmer, you're creating food, you're growing food, you're paid, and then people eat the food. For us, studying, developing new technologies, we are entirely paid out of capital, which may seem like an accounting thing, but it's actually quite important. We are not going to take out our screwdrivers and construct the computers that get built. I mean, maybe some of you are, but most of us are not going to be with a soldering iron and a screwdriver actually building the computers. Most of that's going to be done by machines. It's going to be highly automated. We are going to be doing the designing. And so what that means is we are going to be paid to build something new, to design something new. The actual construction is going to be done out of other people. And so by the time it gets to the construction, it's nothing to do with us. We're just doing the design. And that is going to be a big feature of all of our careers. So my background was a video game developer. When I started as a video game developer, I would do a video game pretty much on my own, almost self-funded. You know, it'd take me a few weeks or something to write a video game. Now it takes huge teams of thousands of people. And for the kind of things that we're doing here, computer architecture, compilers, building new kinds of computers, it's going to be phenomenally expensive. There is huge amounts of money. So even if you work in a small company, you're going to be impacted by that. And what you will find is you may be asked to choose between working for a small company like mine, and people may offer you stock options. And you're going to go, what does that mean? Is there anything value in it, Berlin? Well, if your company does well, as mine did, the stock options worked out to be extremely valuable for the staff who worked there. So you're going to be given those kind of choices. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the beginning, where I started as a video game developer. So when I started as a video game developer on old 8-bit machines, we would take very, very primitive old processors and design video games for them. And over the years, from the 80s into the 90s, it got to the point where the graphics processors that we were using to do video games ended up vastly more powerful than the computers that people were using in supercomputers. The amount of processing that you can use doing graphics in a video game is absolutely phenomenal. And so I thought, oh, there's an opportunity here. I'll work on compilers for these processors. Because you had to program an assembly language, it's a nightmare, you couldn't maintain it, it's very, very difficult. So I'll start a company doing that. And we actually worked on a lot of, interestingly, we actually worked on AI within video games. And we also worked on crashing cars within video games, which we'll come back to later. So, you probably want to know how it ends up. right? And I think as an engineer, it's quite important to think about where are you trying to get to. There was an entrepreneurial talk earlier today. I don't know how many people were in it. It was quite interesting. It was like, who's your customer, what you're trying to get to at the end. So I'm going to tell you how the story ends. And then you can start to think about how you get to. So when you come to sell a company, I think you probably think, right? It just happens. Like somebody comes one day and offers you large amounts of money and they write you a check and you go, do you want to sell the company? And it's not like that. It's really not like that. It took us nearly a year to sell the company, from the original discussions through all of they call it due diligence, where they go through everything, phenomenal amounts of paperwork. And then finally we needed government approval. And in our case, the government approval came at exactly the time of the biggest conference of the year in Europe in our field, the International Supercomputing Conference. So we had to announce it at the conference and had to jump on a video call and sign the contracts in front of everyone. It was quite unexpected but strange. But if somebody offers you a bit of money, how do you say no? If you want to get the price up, right? If you want to do well, right? Because this is a business negotiation, you need to be able to say no. So, firstly, you need to be doing something that's valuable, so you can get the price up. And secondly, you need to be able to negotiate. So that means you want more than one company bidding for you. And that doesn't happen all the time, right? The timing you cannot control. You cannot control when there's more than one company bidding for you. And you need to be able to say, no, I'm walking away, I'm going to take longer. And so to do that, you need some kind of sustainability in your business, and you need to be doing something that's worthwhile to large businesses. So how do you get that? There's three fundamental ways to build a business, right? Sometimes we call those business models. And you'll hear this talked a lot when you go to business discussions and stuff. And some of the advice that made sense in the past doesn't actually make sense anymore. I think it's quite important, especially for the field that we're in. So the obvious thing is to sell a product. You sell a computer. Lots of people buy computers. You sell a computer. How much do you think it costs to design a computer? Seriously. Like, if you were to design it from scratch, it's going to cost you billions. I mean, I know you can build them out of off-the-shelf components, but anyone can build them out of off-the-shelf components. So you have no value as a company if you do that. If you're actually going to design a computer from scratch and all the different components in it, it's going to cost you multiple billions of euros or dollars. Right? You are not going to be able to go to an investor and ask for multiple billions of dollars to design a new computer from scratch. So the idea in technology that you're going to off-the-shelf sell a product is actually not realistic anymore. Unless you really are able to raise a lot of money, and you're only going to be able to do that if you've been established in business and you've got a really good team and you're not straight out of university or with a new interesting idea. So lots of people will tell you you need to sell a scalable product. That's just not realistic anymore, however much people say it is. The alternative is to sell a service. You build something. I'm just going to go back. When was the last time any of you bought a compiler? Is anyone here old enough to have ever bought a compiler? Maybe some of us are, but most of you are not. Yeah. So if you're a compiler business, do not sell compilers off the shelf. It is not going to work. I tried. There is one exception. Do you know what the exception is? The most valuable compiler company in the world? They are English. They're called Micro Focus. Do you know what language they do? See if you can guess what language the most valuable compiler company in the world does. Some of you may know. COBOL. Yeah, good guess. COBOL. Why? Why do you make money out of COBOL compilers rather than like AI compilers or something new? It's because if your system is still written in COBOL, no one understands it. No one can switch it off. They will pay any money to keep it going. That's the reality. Yeah. Yeah. So the alternative is to sell a service. And actually, selling compiler services is actually, if you can build compilers, it's relatively easy. I can kind of help you, explain to you how to do it. But if you can build compilers custom for somebody, you can do it if you're known as being reasonably good at building compilers, because people need compiler developers. They need to build compilers, and then the problem is they suddenly decide they don't need compilers. It's kind of cyclical, so you need to be able to survive the uptimes and the downtimes. But you can build compilers custom for people if you know how to do it. Investors will be very, very rude about this idea, because where's the value of the company? You're just people, and the people could just go and get a job at the company that wants a compiler. So in terms of building a compiler business, you can do it without investment, but then you don't have enough money to actually build any new technology or do anything new. You can make what's called a lifestyle business, which investors are very rude about. You shouldn't necessarily think of that as a bad thing. Having a nice lifestyle is quite cool. One of the I deal with Americans now. One of the Americans went on holiday in Italy a couple of weeks ago, around here somewhere, and it was like a revelation to him. He said, "Italy's amazing. I understand Europeans now. I went at 1 o'clock to the shop, and it was shut. And I was like, why is it shut? It wouldn't be shut in America." And he said, it's incredible. The person running the shop could have earned more money by opening at 1 o'clock, but she's decided to have a nice lifestyle. I was thinking, yeah. And that's the thing about a lifestyle business. Investors don't like it, but actually you can make a nice lifestyle out of it. So you should seriously consider it. However much people are rude to you about the idea of a lifestyle business, actually it's quite a nice thing to be able to, you know, build a compiler when people need it and not when not. But there is a third way of building a company that actually generates a lot of value. And it's a relatively new thing, but it is quite important, and it generates a lot of value for a relatively small amount of investment. And that's by having a big impact. Because if you're a large, slow-moving company, as lots of large, slow-moving companies are, you have established products that you spent billions and years establishing in the market and making money out of, but the market changes, and you want to be able to get your new technology out there in a changing market. And if you have had a big impact on your market without necessarily making money out of it, you're very valuable to them. You have a kind of power, or at least influence, within that market that's very valuable to a large company. A large company can sell their product if they have that influence, if they can direct things or influence the industry in a way that's important for them. And so if you want to make a valuable company, if you look at big valuable exits, we call it, when you sell your shares, if you want to look at a big valuable company for a very small amount of investment, then actually you should think much more about impact than selling anything at all. In fact, some companies sell for a lot of money without ever having sold anything, because that's more valuable to a large company. They've already got products to sell. So, I talked about compilers. So the interesting thing about a compiler is, although you never buy them, they join two worlds. They join the worlds of hardware with the world of software. Two completely different skill sets, different kinds of expertise, different ways of looking at things. And actually being able to join two worlds is actually quite important, because if you do want to invest $1 billion in developing a new product, you're going to need lots of different specialist skills. And so if you can connect those specialist skills, get those different specialists to work together, you can enable both kinds of specialists to make money and deliver value for their specialism without necessarily having to work together, which they may find difficult. So that's actually what's important about compilers. It is the connection between these two worlds. And if we get back to the business, because I said this talk is going to be about how new technologies are adopted in the market. And one of the best books about how new technologies are developed in the market is called Crossing the Chasm. It's a really good book. If you're interested in technology business and how new technologies are adopted, it is actually a really good book because it describes the process of people adopting new technologies and ideas. And they break it down into different stages. The stage that we care about is really the first two stages. Because in the later stages, you've got a product. Like I said, we're going to get paid to design stuff. We're not going to get paid to maintain old stuff. Maybe we are a bit, but it's not. We're here to build new technologies. So there's two early stages that new technologies go through. And there is a chasm between them. It's very difficult to get from one to the other. So the first stage, the book calls innovators. And innovators, from a business point of view, buy projects. So if you develop a new technology, if you develop some brilliant new compiler or brilliant new computer technology or something like that, and you haven't raised huge amounts of money, so it's a really good idea, it's really cool, it's doing something new and revolutionary, but you haven't spent $1 billion on it, but you've got enough of a demonstration. There are customers out there in big companies who are looking to look good within the company by trying something new. And they will actually pay you to do a project to integrate the technology you've got with the stuff they've got to be able to demonstrate internally how it works. Now, they may well be thinking, if it works, we'll just copy it. Normally they do. But they will pay you money. They'll pay you money to do that technology. Now, a lot of investors, again, will get very rude about that. They say you want to sell a product at scale, but actually you don't get to that point. You don't get to that point without going through the first one. You have to prove your technology via much more early innovator customers who are only really interested because this is a cool new technology. You may find yourself buying new technologies that you know are completely impractical, but you're going to buy it because it's kind of cool and interesting. You think, oh, I'll buy this new technology, it's cool and interesting. I'll try it out. Those are the innovators. You're not really going to make money out of them selling an individual compiler or something to you, but you are going to be able to make money out of, you could develop a technology demo and go to some big company and say, give me $1 million, give me $5 million to do a demonstration for you. I say dollars because generally it is Americans who do this. You should know this, right? The important business, the innovators are generally Americans who will actually sign a decent-sized contract for you. You can build a demo for them. It's not what your investors will call a scalable project. You can't sell lots of those projects, but it will bring money in, and it will allow you to understand more about what the customer is thinking, and it will allow you to take your business to the next stage. But the next class of customer, called early adopters, they are going to buy products at scale. But they have a slightly different way of thinking about things. So they like new technology, but they're a bit more pragmatic. It kind of has to work. So they're prepared to pay a bit more, they're prepared to pay more than for the older technologies, but it does kind of have to work. It has to do something useful for them. And if you think about the products that you buy that are cool and new, there's aspects of the product that are important, but there's other aspects that are not part of the product that are also important. So I'll give you an example, right? You may say, I want to buy an electric car, right? Sounds cool, should be more environmentally friendly. All of the sensible people around you will say, yeah, but how do you charge it? Where are the charging stations? Now, the charging stations are not part of the product. They're separate from the product. They're out in the world. Without car charging stations, your electric car is kind of useless. Like, what can you do? I suppose you can drive near home and you can go back and stuff like that. But the charging stations are really important, but the charging stations are external to the product. Now, why is this important for compilers? I noticed the compiler talk earlier, Michael was talking about ecosystem, right? Ecosystem is really important in computers. Why do you buy an Intel or AMD processor for your laptop and you have an ARM processor in your smartphone or tablet? Why do you do that? The answer is, today, if I'm honest, see, this is why I don't want it written down, but if I'm honest, right, the answer is nothing to do with the benefits of ARM or x86 architecture. The truth is, the phone software works on an ARM processor and your PC software works on an x86 processor. It's nothing to do with the product itself. It's about what we call the ecosystem, the software that's out there. So the ecosystem out there is critically important. So if you remember, I was talking about how do you make a big impact? Actually, instead of getting worked up about the product itself, you can start to think about the ecosystem out there. Can you have an impact on the ecosystem? And that's what we did. So in our field, the field of using graphics processors for things like supercomputers or artificial intelligence, was dominated by a programming model from one GPU vendor. Many of you may know what it is. Which meant that if you were another GPU vendor or you were doing another AI processor, your product didn't have an ecosystem. So you couldn't sell it. I mean, it was interesting, you could sell a project, but you couldn't sell it at scale because the software doesn't work with it. The Crossing the Chasm book calls this concept the difference between the product and the whole product. So the product is what's actually in the product, like the car, and the whole product is the whole experience of using the product. Does your product work with software? Does it work with charging stations? What's it like to use the product? That's why we ended up focusing on the ecosystem. So, how do you build an ecosystem? I told you CodePlay wasn't sold as a compiler company. I said don't build a compiler company. Obviously we built a compiler company, but we became an ecosystem company. And when we sold it as an ecosystem company, not as a compiler company. It's a fundamental difference because it's the ecosystem where one product or another product succeeds or fails. So how do you build an ecosystem? It's not about thinking about your own product and your own needs. It's about thinking about other people's needs. So how do you think about why would software developers develop software for other people's GPUs? Why would they do that? You've got to make it worthwhile for them, or you've got to make it inspiring for them. You've got to give them a benefit. Why would people build electric car charging stations for electric cars before there were any electric cars? Why would you just build a whole charging infrastructure and just wait for an electric car to come by and charge the electric car? It doesn't make any sense. You're just going to lose money out of it, right? You've got to think about that. So you've got to think about other people's needs. What are other people's needs, and why are they going to invest in building technology? The world's successful ecosystem companies thought about that. They came up with answers for that, and they understood that that was their value. I think it's really interesting about ARM, right? So ARM designed a processor that was more power efficient than anyone else's. He created an instruction set. And the truth is, most ARM processors that you see today are not actually designed by ARM. Maybe that's not true, but a lot of it is true. ARM maintains the ecosystem. That's their value. Ultimately, ARM is an ecosystem company. They maintain the instruction set. Why do they do that? Because it means as a software developer, it's safe to invest in developing software for ARM processors. That's the most important thing they do. It's valuable, not to their customers, but to the software developers. And the customers need the software developers. They're doing something that's thinking about other people. And it's very, very hard for a large company to do that. And that is why something becomes valuable. We tried lots of things. We tried lots of things over the years to try and work out how do we make ourselves valuable to large companies so that we can do well. You've got to think to yourself, what can I do that's valuable that a large company can't do? And one thing a large company can't do is think about other people's needs. They need huge amounts of money to come in all the time. If you're a large company, you've got a lot of people and you've got a lot of investors and you've got to pay more money. It's actually quite hard. You know, you make your product, you ship your product. You're not going to think about the future, about the needs of some, you know, hypothetical car charging station or software developer that's like not going to pay you any money. Why are you going to think about that? So you can do something that's valuable by thinking about the business needs of others. What you can also do is create a mixture of skills. One of the things that I've learned over many years in this industry is how difficult it is to combine different skill sets together. Most organizations have one skill set that they're really good at, and they have horrible problems where they all argue with the other people who have a different skill set and a different way of looking at things. When I was a game developer, we just got used to it, right? We'd have programmers who would write the graphics engine, and we had artists who would make it look good, and we just had to work together. We had very different ways of looking at things, but we had to work together. I find it interesting that supercomputing is like that. If you build supercomputers, you've got scientists who are designing quantum something or others and climate models and nuclear fusion and things like that I don't understand. And then you have other people designing the computer system and designing the software. So you need to be able to make those different skill sets work together. And that is a very valuable thing that you should think about. Being very narrow in your viewpoint does work once everything's established and everyone knows what they're doing. But when you need to bring different skill sets together in a new way to achieve something new, bringing those skill sets together is really hard. And we've been through a big transition in the way processors work, to start to use things like graphics processors and heterogeneous systems. It's a whole massive change. And the whole thought process around that is quite difficult. So we need to bring the experts together in a different way. We're doing it within AI. We've got AI and data scientists, and we've got hardware designers. Very, very different ways of looking at things. And we need to bring those experts together. Now, you could design a big AI chip, or you could design big AI software, but you're going to have to raise a lot of money. But if you build a company that builds an ecosystem that enables those people to work together, you can have much more of an impact for less. That's where we ended up. And you can't copy us, because once you've done it, people know how to do it, right? But that's something that you've got to think about if you decide to work for a startup or you decide to go down a new field. You've got to think, where can I have a massive amount of impact where it's hard for people to do it, and it's hard for large companies to do it, and it isn't going to cost me a huge amount of money. I'm not going to have to raise $1 billion to do it. So how did we do it? We tried lots of things. In the early days, we did lots of video game stuff. So we did lots of stuff with graphics. We did some of the early graphics compilers. It was really easy to copy. If your thing is really easy to copy, you're not going to make much money out of it. That's one of the big problems, especially as a small company. You know, a large company is going to go, oh, that's very interesting. We'll make it ourselves, right? And that's what we did. We did lots of stuff to do with video games. Video games is a well-organized industry. Everyone understands what a video game is. Everyone understands what a graphics processor is for. You understand what to do, so everyone can work out to do it. There's no value you can add without a huge amount of investment. How am I doing for time? Oh, no. So what we actually found, though, is it was very hard to take ideas from video games about how people work together and bring it to new industries like AI. Like, if I said to you, we're going to design a graphics processor for a games console, it would be obvious to you that there would be video games companies out there that would design the video games for the processor, right? That would be obvious. So it would be obvious to you that you would need to work with video games developers who know how to do video games, as well as design the chip that goes into the video games console. If you went into a field like AI, which is new, that's not obvious. It's not obvious that you need to work with AI software developers out there while designing an AI chip. Because what's AI software? You don't know what it's for. I mean, you know it's valuable and you know people are doing lots of stuff with it, but you don't actually know what AI software looks like and what people are doing. What's the use case? The truth of the use case of AI, you know, most of the money in AI, right, is all these companies looking at what you're doing on your phones with your social media and looking at the things you buy from shops and recommending other things to sell to you. That's where most of the money is. Now, you don't get exciting papers out of that, right? You don't get, it's not like, you know, companies that work out how to play chess really, really well, they don't make any money out of that, right? They make money out of working out how to sell you stuff. So that's what you've got to work out how to do. And you don't find that stuff for free. Okay. So, we had a big impact. 10 minutes, right? We had a big impact, but we didn't make any money out of that. It was all free. We had a big impact on the industry. We made it available open source, open standard and stuff. There's no money out of that. So, how do we keep the company going? Well, we actually combined two things. We combined the projects, so we would actually build compilers for people with doing the ecosystem work. Every investor will tell you that's a stupid idea. It's not. Because we had a sustainable business. And by having a sustainable business, we were able to say no until the time was right. So you've got to ignore a lot of advice. You know, the worst piece of advice people ever get, I don't know if you get in other countries, but in Britain, really common business advice is, you need to work out how to make money when you sleep. If you start a company, you're not going to be doing any sleeping. That's the truth. You're not going to be making money. No one is going to pay you to sleep. So you've really got to do it. How do you sell without spending lots of money on marketing? How do you then take the profits from that and do other things? And the answer to that is you've got to work out how to build a reputation. People will come to you and pay you a lot of money to do something if they know you're good. And that means you have to do a lot of things very publicly. You have to be very brave, you have to be out there, and you have to do it publicly so that people know that you're good. And then when they come to you, if you sell a project, you're not going, this is my technology, it's completely fantastic, you should use this, shut up and give me your money. It doesn't work with projects. You've got to stop, and you've got to listen, and hear what their problem is, and solve their problem, and maybe use your technology to help solve their problem. Don't ram your technology down their throats. So you become a problem solver. If you want to make the company valuable, if you want to do it this way, you have to be very brave. To do stuff publicly is much more brave than it is to do it privately, and that means all of your staff need to be very brave. They need to be very out there. It's quite a thing. It's not a normal thing in companies to create that sense of bravery of going out there and showing people what you're doing and doing it in that way. And all of this is very valuable. Okay, so I've talked a lot about investors. If you want to raise investment, there's a few bits of advice I want to give you. Firstly is, you need to have a different message for different people. You can't say the same things to your investors as you say to your customers and to your staff. So you've got to have in your head different messages for different people. I really struggle with this, to be honest. But you do have to be able to do it. So your investors, it has to be very, very simple. Don't say very much. I used to think that investors were idiots. They don't know anything about my business. Now I've got a little bit more money, I'm an investor myself, and I invest in companies and I know nothing about them. I look at them, I've got no time. And if I knew anything about it, I'd be an insider and it would be illegal for me to invest in them. So I understand investors now. They understand very little about your business. There's a very simple message. Are you any good? Have you done anything exciting? And there is one third thing that no one tells you that you need to know, that every investor is going to ask. How do I avoid paying tax? I found it a lot easier to raise funding when I learned that one. There are a lot of tax incentives for new technology startups. You make sure that you worked all of those out in whichever country you're in, because it makes it a lot easier to raise funding. For your staff, as a small company, you can hire really, really smart, idealistic people. Don't think that as a small company you can't hire good people like the big companies can. You can actually hire really good people if you start predominantly with quite young people out of university, but if you can spot talent, new people in a new field, you tell them that you're doing something important. You tell them, remember what I said earlier about Europeans, lifestyle. You tell them that they're going to be able to have a good lifestyle, they're going to be able to do something good in the company that's going to feel good, that they're going to have a lot of freedom and independence and be able to do something that really makes a difference. And to customers, you've got to own up to the fact that you're early stage and that they're early stage. And actually that can be a strength, because then they can have a sense of ownership. I remember when I was doing video games, actually we were more successful with publishers who went out and sold the games if we sold the game early rather than late. You'd think it would be easier to sell the game to a publisher when it's finished. It's much harder. It's much easier to sell the game early before you finished it. So you may think, oh, my technology's a bit rough. It's not. Actually, if you sell your technology to customers early, if they're early style customers, the fact that it's not finished means that they have a sense of ownership and say over what you're going to build. And that means that if you're successful, if you do a good project, they can say, well, I was part of that. So you've got to think about that with customers. I ended up putting a lot of rough demos in front of customers because I knew they preferred the rough demos than the complete ones. The complete ones, like, well, where do they fit in? The rough demos, like, they can imagine to themselves that they can do something special and unique that makes them look good, that makes their company look good, and where they feel part of it. And if they feel part of it, they are going to be your advocate as well. And the last thing is, you do need a lot of specialists, actually. You should get bankers. It's not necessarily easier for your first company, but I went to quite a few investors and they said, whatever you do, don't get bankers. They're rubbish. And I learned after a while that was because the bankers were going to get you a better deal, and it wasn't remotely in your interests. You need bankers. So there are people who will raise funding for your startup. If you're reasonably credible, if you're a reasonably smart team with something reasonable, there are people there who will help you get funding. They will put a much simpler message in front of investors. They will talk to a lot of investors. They understand how to deal with the tax issue I talked about. And they will take a cut of the investment. Sign them up early on. Seriously, it will make a massive difference. And your investors won't like it, but I actually found that although they complain, without the bankers, the investors behave in such a nightmarish way that you go, stuff your money, I don't want to deal with you. So actually you need them there as an intermediary. You need some kind of consultants in the middle helping you raise funding. Otherwise, the whole process is just too much of a nightmare. And yes, they may take a lot of money, you may think, but it absolutely make a massive difference, assuming that they're reasonably good. There is a small difference in that investors do want to be with the crowd. If you've got to know about most investors, they're investing other people's money. Unless you come to an individual, most investors, like most investment funds, are investing other people's money. And if it's a failure, they want to be able to say it's not my fault. They don't really mind if it's a failure because it's other people's money anyway, but they want to say it's not my fault. So the investors will go with the crowd. Acquirers, if somebody's going to buy your company, they won't necessarily do that. So you do have to have a sense with the investors that you're doing something that makes sense that lots of other people are doing. But when you're selling the company, you do have to say that there's something unique. And that's, again, one of the difficulties that you have of having to keep different messages in your head and using the right message for the right thing. Actually, there's two last things. I hope I've got time. Two last things that I really want to say. These are quite important. As a small company, you have an advantage over a large company of being fast moving. Being fast moving requires a lot of preparation. I know it's a strange thing to say, but being ready to move fast actually requires you putting yourself into a position where you've built up a culture and a way of doing things that allows you to adapt. It doesn't mean that first sign of trouble, you jump all around and you say, oh yeah, I'll do whatever I want at any time. But actually preparing your team, however small they are, with a mindset of, okay, we're building this technology in a way where we can adapt very quickly to what our first customers tell us. That's the mindset you've got to get into. There is a very entertaining English psychologist called Richard Wiseman. He does lots of videos and TV programs. I recommend him. He talks about being lucky or unlucky. What I'm going to say, it probably sounds quite American rather than European, but if you watch Rich Meisman, you'll get it. You'll understand what I'm saying. And it made a big difference to me. A lot of being lucky is being able to spot luck or opportunity in front of you. So when you build a company, you're going to think, my opportunity looks like this. My customer is going to come to me and they're going to pay me €1 million to build a flying car, right? And a customer comes to you and says, that's really cool. You know, what you've done is absolutely amazing. But I don't want a flying car, I want to fly a motorbike. And you say, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't designed a flying motorbike. That's the wrong answer. The answer is, yeah, we just removed 2 wheels. We've got a flying motorbike, okay? Do it. I made this mistake early on. I was too focused on, this is my vision, this is what I want a customer to say. I learnt customers are going to come to you with opportunities that are unexpected, and when that happens, you say, yes, this is my opportunity, pay me money, I'll work out the details later. That's how you run a business.